Good morning. This is, I guess, a complement to the talk Marta just gave, and is a little bit more forward-looking about the, I guess, one of the directions that Fiddle is helping to work towards, and in particular, I think the thought here, and how I'm gonna be framing this is around the work that we're doing for improving efficiency and thinking about sort of like where can we automate a little bit better, and where can you start to see things becoming a bit more permissionless. So Phil Plus, as it has been existing over the last few years, one of the major criticisms of this mechanism that we have is the human in the loop portion of it, right? So that there is this thing that we get into pretty quick in trying to define what we want and what this incentive is, which is that good data and the ability to make Filecoin better, which is something that wants to be incentivized, is an inherently subjective problem. And we approach that, or Phil Plus approached that in its initial design through having humans and having this tree structure to label data and label activity of like, is this worthy of going up to this more expensive tier, and so that has this flip side of like, now there's this both process that takes a lot of time. You've got some, like, you have to deal with this and what happens if someone makes a different decision, and there's this human that's unpredictable, and so that's hard to plan your business around, because now what happens if someone decides, oh, this part of your data set no longer is eligible or whatever. So there's a couple things here of certainty for planning, and also that there's this human in the loop that you have to deal with. So we're looking into FVM as this now exists, to do a couple things to mitigate parts of this issue. The first is that we can make a bunch of flows that just take a bunch of process time more automatic, and that gives you a level of confidence that things are just going to happen. And we can also do some of the compliance efforts that right now involve a human looking at things that have happened in dashboards, and those can just those are sufficiently formulaic that they can be encoded into a smart contract, and we don't need the human to do that. That's just a thing that can be part of how DataCap happens. And then this also, I think the sort of second part is how we can mature our evaluation tooling, and sort of begin to encode more and more types of how we evaluate good data in automatic ways. Okay, so let's talk about the smart contract work that's underway. So the first concrete pain point that is already underway to be addressed is just dealing with DataCap as this token asset, ERC20-ish token. There's a couple things that are painful. If we have given out DataCap, it hasn't been spent, but it is either with an allocator who then tells us, actually, I don't have my wallet anymore, or the allocator gives it to a client and the client says they don't have their wallet anymore, or the client doesn't spend it and so it just sort of stays on their balance for months. The process of clawing that back at any of those processes before it actually gets spent in deals is wildly complex. Hasn't been touched since 2021, involves two allocators, two verified clients in the verified registry, signing messages indicating that they would like to take back that DataCap from the address that has it, followed by the root key holder address, which is a relatively needing to be secured address because it controls the whole program, needing to sign off on those, again, with two ledgers. And so to do any removal right now is a four-step process that's kind of painful. So how do you fix this? Well, and this is going in, but how do we fix this? We're working on something called a contract meta allocator. And so instead of directly having that DataCap allowance flow to the allocator, we can have the DataCap allowance, so this is one step before the actual DataCap, flow to a smart contract. And that smart contract can now have subbalances for the allocators. So the allocators don't get it directly on their multisig. Rather, they have a balance of their allowance lives in a smart contract, and they can spend from that in the same way that they could spend from it being directly on theirs. Either way, it is, does the message go to the verified registry? But now that it's in this smart contract, you can start to have less painful ways to change those balances. So you can have a governance owner account that is not involving two verified registry actors plus the root key holders to reset balances. So this lets you go to a lighter weight process for how you're going to handle people having problems. And so the thought is that one of these contract meta allocators can get used for a specific sort of subset of allocators within a single governance subsection. So like all of the traditional LDN allocators may well have their accounts within one of these smart contracts and may, as in doing so, end up sort of allowing a specific set of people who can respond more quickly than that previous process handle that. Let me go back to what the full flow is to make that clear. The verified registry is a built-in actor that handles the distribution of verifiable data. And so it is a place where there is a single account that provides an allowance, is the term that gets used, to a set of verifiers or notaries or allocators. These are all words that are been used at different times to define the secondary middle tier role. Those actors, or those addresses, are then allowed to make a call called add verified client, which turns their allowance into actual DataCap, which is a different actor, on sort of end client addresses. Those verified clients that have been specified and now have a balance of DataCap can then turn that DataCap into allocations. The allocation is linked to a specific storage provider who then, in a subsequent sector activation, claims that allowance to turn the deal that they've activated in their sector to get a flag and use up the DataCap. So there's this 3 or 4 step process of allowance getting created, allowance turning into DataCap on a client, the client allocating that DataCap over to a storage provider, and then the storage provider finally claiming that allowance to get a verified deal with the DataCap. So we've got a few different interaction points in here, and so there's friction at all of these different levels, right? So, okay. So I talked about that first part of like how you can put in a smart contract at the allowance part, at that first step of getting it to allocators who then are making these add verified client claims. But what about that next sort of intermediate part? And we think that there's a space for smart contracts there too, and that's the part that's actively under development. The adding verified clients and then the clients allocating their DataCap can also end up getting encapsulated by a smart contract. So when the allocator says they want to add DataCap to some end client for their data set, they could instead allocate that DataCap to another smart contract. And that smart contract would then proxy allocation calls. So when the client wants to make their deal and is putting a message on chain saying this storage provider can now use some DataCap, instead of sending that directly to the FO6 system actor, they can send their request to use DataCap to a smart contract that has their balance, and it will proxy it and use the shared or a balance allocated to that client. And so what this means is the client doesn't directly have an account in the system actor that controls DataCap, but rather is able to get DataCap with limitations, where the limitations are specified by the smart contract. And so now you can start to impose some constraints. And so instead of giving unrestricted DataCap, you can give DataCap with restrictions. And what sorts of restrictions can you give that the smart contract might enforce? Well, you can verify that only deals that are going to the SPs that the client initially said they were working with are allowed to be proxied. So if the client says, I want to upload this data set to these 5 SPs, they get a DataCap balance, but that DataCap balance can only be spent with those 5 SPs. They can't then go around and make a new SP and do that without going back to their allocator and sort of updating their request. You can enforce a set of the other things that the client is saying that are a lot of what the human checks are today. So for instance, if the initial application is saying, hey, I'm going to upload this data set, I'm going to upload it 5 times to these 5 SPs, and then the client has uploaded all to one SP, at some point the smart contract can pretty easily say, hey, what I've done so far is I've proxied 100 deals to one SP and no deals to any other SPs. That is sufficiently out of the 5x replication that you said as a client these deals were going to be. I'm not going to keep proxying to this oversubscribed SP. And in fact, you have to make the deals to the other ones if you want to keep using your DataCap balance. So you've got a set of ways where you can limit abuse of saying this is DataCap, but it's DataCap with the restriction that you actually have to follow your schedule of I'm going to do 5 replications. So there's a set of these things where right now this is just a thing that we've got this manual compliance and human in the loop that can become great. Rather than saying I'm going to give you 50 TIBs of DataCap, and then once you've spent that, a human's going to look, make sure you did what you said, and then give you the next tranche. We can give you all of it, but with the restriction, and now there isn't this like constant back and forth in human piece. The other thing we're, I think, excited for that comes a little bit later is as we get Spark retrieval factors for SPs on chain, these smart contracts can be looking at that and say, great, here's some DataCap, and maybe this DataCap can actually even be used by any client, but it can be used for clients and for deals that are going to SPs that have good retrievability. And so now there's this direct incentive for an SP to maintain a retrievability score because it means that they can get a flow of unpermissioned deals while that's true. And so we can start to sort of do experimentation as we're able to encode various constraints that we think are by themselves interesting directions or experiments for how to indicate that a subsection of deals is worthy of DataCap. Cool. So that was sort of these direct smart contracts. The meta allocator is already existing, and we have deployed, and it has DataCap, and we're starting to have some individual allocators using that as a way of proving out that that is properly audited and safe. The sort of proxies of clients is under development, but we'll start experimenting with that soon. I think that's a drop-in that we can have allocators be able to select, that instead of directly saying, I want to grant you unrestricted DataCap today, the allocator can, on a per-client basis, say, actually, I want to give you restricted DataCap through a smart contract. It requires some updated changes to client tooling in deal making. We're working on that as well. But for primarily, this is for client stuff. So it's the Lotus or Boost clients that are making those deals. We'll have some patches, but we'd like to work with other client tooling to make sure everyone supports this indirection of client allocations through smart contracts. Evaluations. So there's a few different ways that we are doing evaluation of deal making quality. There's one that's like, this is meant to be public data, where we're looking at things like retrievability, or that there's some data DAO maintaining replication of data. Another way that you might evaluate data is saying, hey, this is paid data. We can show that there's economic activity associated with this data that's making it good. Or maybe there's forms of like, this is long-term aligned with like the Filecoin vision, where someone is willing to say, I'm willing to take like to really defer rewards in some way, where like I don't need DataCap now because I suspect I will be able to make money on future retrievals because this is going to be a super like valuable data set in the future. And so maybe we will subsidize the deal today with DataCap if you're willing to put in sufficient money that you think you make up for retrievals or things of that nature, right? So there's questions of, are there ways to identify these subjective, but we can agree this seems like it is a limited subset of the broader set of all good deals that we can encode. And once we can encode those become the evaluation of that section of, or that subset of our allocation pathways. So allocators today have a compliance report that Mario described before, where every 5 PIBs and then 10 PIBs, there becomes sort of this due diligence review where they justify here's all of the data and the clients that I've done. That gets summarized, and we look and we say, is this seeming to follow some methodology of this being a representative of good data? And what we'd like to do is have these clearer, more objective evaluations where an allocation pathway goes into this saying, the thing that I'm really specializing in is public data. I'm going to have a bunch of data that is publicly retrievable. I'm going to try and somehow show usefulness to the broader network of this. That's the evaluation criteria that I want. And all of the different allocators that are using that as their evaluation can logically get grouped together within that common evaluation. And so there's been pictures of sort of a tree structure rather than individual allocators as just by themselves. And that tree, the middle layer is these common evaluations. Because once you've got a common evaluation of a bunch of allocators signing up to say, great, the thing I'm aiming for is public data, now you can figure out which one's doing that the best. And you can actually have a race to the top, which is, I think, generally the thing that we're most excited about here. We've got a few of these that we think are today sufficiently concrete that we can have an evaluation of how well you're doing these things. But we would like to have other forms of evaluation. And so if you have ideas or want to brainstorm with us of what might be these evaluation layers that some set of allocators might want to use to demonstrate this is good data, we'd be super interested to have those conversations and experiment with what might other ways to identify sectors of good data be. Cool. And then finally, just stepping back a little bit, I think we've had this conversation in various ways a few times, but the Phil Plus game that we live in today. We have this mechanism called Phil Plus or DataCap or verified data. It increases the block reward for the life of a deal that gets tagged. And that is the mechanism that we've built a bunch of things around. In the context of a single deal, you get this additional value over the course of the deal, which is a year and a half, 3 years, 5 years. This happens within, at a sort of one level up, broader economic level, somewhat of a zero-sum game. There is block rewards that happen, and you get more of the fraction of the overall block rewards. You get more tickets to that game by having verified data than not verified data. But if everyone has verified data, it's not like everyone is getting 10x more money, right? Like the pot is the same. So once everyone is getting that block reward multiplier, no one is getting that block reward multiplier. So the incentive is most impactful in the sort of overall economic sense when it is used sparingly, right? If 10% have it, then they suddenly get this outsized most of the reward, versus if everyone gets it, then it just is the same as if no one is getting it. So there's this interesting curve of where the delta of how much you actually take home at an absolute sense is most impacted by the issuance. One of the things that it's worth thinking about is that what we end up with is we've got this one mechanism of you can 10x or not 10x. So there's two tiers. And so the natural sort of game over time is how can I most cheaply get to that upper tier, right? And so we've structured a game in Phil Plus today where the rational behavior is everyone in the ecosystem competing against the structure of the game of how can I most cheaply win the game. And that's not really the best structure of a game, but it is the structure that we have today. And so I think one of the meta conversations we've been having is how do we restructure that game, and are there things we can do? So one of the things here, and I think this is sort of this how do we experiment safely? We had this conversation yesterday as well. But are there ways to instead structure this game to get a race to the top, to get people to be invested and seeing that the bulk of the rewards come from innovating or doing something better than other participants rather than all participants trying to most cheaply play the game? And so you could imagine things like rewarding top participants, but that restructuring is, I think, going to be the next meta conversation as a community that we need to have of how do we do that while still providing some predictability for businesses and not rocking the ship too hard. All right. I think that was what I wanted to say.